Risk of standing between a big room of people and lunch, I do want to have some time for questions for our panelists and conversation of us all together. We'll probably have maybe 20 minutes or so for questions from all of you. So if people could line up at either of the mics there, and we'd love to get your questions and comments. Actually, I would say with what Chloe said earlier, questions. There should be a question mark at the end of at the end of each one. While people are maybe gathering their thoughts and preparing questions, I'll take the liberty of posing the first. I wonder if I've been thinking about this through all the presentations, and I should say, TK, it's why I gave you homework of putting together photos, because I really wanted you to share, and I'm glad that you shared those photos of the lantern ceremony, for example, because I really want us to think together about how the different kind of ethical and spiritual principles and values that you've shared from each of your faith traditions, how those might translate into different forms of action, right? So that a Buddhist action, for example, to memorialize the deaths of 9/11 might look different from a Christian or secular action. You know, float lanterns in the Hudson, and it's got a particular resonance that draws on a tradition. Or again, Michael, the example that you gave of Catholic priests using their own blood to mark the runway of planes bearing arms to Central America, it really, I think, draws from a Catholic ritual vocabulary in a powerful way. So I wondered if other people could talk about, any of the four of you, to say a little more about how the values and principles that you've introduced might play out on the ground. Are there different forms of civil disobedience or forms of action that, you know, your faith tradition might inform, and that all faith traditions, faith communities could learn from? Right.
Well, I'll just say for me, Jewish nonviolent action is certainly grounded and rooted in text study, biblical and rabbinic sources. So that's sort of the theory end, and then the practice end is how to bring that into the world. Some of the most powerful expressions I've seen of that are linked to the Jewish calendar year. I mentioned the holiday of Passover. There are other holidays that you can root action in, expressing the essential nature of that holiday, or Jewish ritual practices. I'd say the combination of ritual and text study would be key for Jewish practice. I think probably quite similar in Islam as well.
Yes, there are lots of subtle ways too. I mean, definitely, it's a very agricultural year, are similar to the Jewish year. But there's also lots of subtle ways. Like, for example, Ramadan is coming up, which is right smack in the middle of the Poor People's Campaign. And most of our charitable contributions are philanthropic ones, especially, you know, countering poverty and countering racism and dealing with refugee crises. So just remembering those things every sermon. I mean, for the 6 weeks of like the Poor People's Campaign, just letting every congregant know, or every imam or clergy of your congregation know that these are the 6 weeks, these are the 6 themes. Gear your sermons towards that theme. Every youth group that week, just, you know, insidiously just mention, if it's week 4, talk about eco-justice. If it's your Sunday school class, that's your topic at your Gurdwara. You know, on the night of power, we pray all night and just salawat. Remember that. Your e-blast, you know, every one of us comes from an organization. Have every week your e-blast saying, hey, this is the 4th week, this is the 3rd week, this is the countdown. You know, just little subtle things that are so, just like, you know, like sort of backhanded slaps, like, you know, whatever you do, just think those 6 themes, you know, and just bring back quotes from the text, and bring back the intersectionality of the traditions. I mean, in our tradition, you know, we have the story of Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, and he inspired Gandhi. Gandhi said, I learned oppression from the story of Imam Hussein. And Dr. King learned, you know, theories and practices from Gandhi and nonviolence. He had a picture of Gandhi right behind him in his office. you know, and when I was in Standing Rock, we were practicing Gandhian nonviolence, and it was in the month of Muharram, the holy month for the Shias, and I was reminded that I was an indigenous tribe because we talked about the Marsh Arabs. So here it was just, everything was so appreciate what you learned from other traditions, I think. Just appreciate that, because it will remind you about the beauty of your own tradition.
Marcy, well, actually, I wanted to push you a little on this particular question too, because I had it in mind when you were talking. You were introducing. I know it's one of the core principles of the Gita is this idea of acting without attachment, desireless action, right? And then I thought about the very important question from in our keynote session about, you know, what are the goals of the campaign, right? So does acting without attachment mean that you don't have like clear specific goals for direct action, or how would that play out on the ground?
Thank you so much. You picked a hole which is actually just means that I forgot to read one quote. That was an important clarification that was part of my presentation, but which I somehow skipped in my desperation to fit the time slot. Gandhi is very clear, and I think contemporary activism has no confusion about this, that detachment from the outcome does not mean that you're indifferent to the outcome. All it means is that you are separating your ego from the result. It is that ego level attachment that triggers the fear and the anxiety and the clinginess. So there is all to be in the body is to act. It is meaningless to act if you don't care about where the action is going. For example, if I need to come here, I need to care about getting on the right train, right? In that sense, I can't say, okay, I got on a train, it just didn't go to the right destination. So it is the central issue there is, and so in the 5 niyamas, brahmacharya is often interpreted as celibacy, and that maybe that's one dimension of it. But in its core, in its essence, brahmacharya is detachment from the ego. And again, I want to clarify that Hindu metaphysics is very clear that you cannot be in this body and not have an ego. Okay. In fact, one of our saints puts it very beautifully. He says it's like a glass jar that is fully submerged in a body of water. The glass is still there, but what is important to realize is that inside and outside it is the same divinity. Our problems arise from confusing, in a sense, losing sight of that divinity because we become so much preoccupied with the shell or with the small self. I'm sorry if that's too long.
Thanks.
Yeah, very good.
Just adding to that one. So also, because I wasn't expect that I'd be here this time, or even like 10, 20 some years ago. 30 years ago. So I don't know. For me, imagination where you're gonna go is not important. Maybe important for some people, but not for me because I never work on that way. So for attachment also is if you're thinking of how you want it to be, then you can go only that far. But if you're working on the present moment, you can go any directions. So that's also part of that. I think it's important.
So the non-attachment like opens a larger space of possibility because you're not so directed to any one thing. You could go anywhere with it. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
I'm Cheryl.
Oh, you need to, there's a little switch on the mic. There you go.
Cheryl Lynch, UU Congregation of Queens, and this question is for Rajni. You gave a reading about the chariot, and I'd just like to have you re-identify where that came from, the source of that.
Okay. So it's one of the central epics of the Indian subcontinent. Actually, there are many versions of it, but it's called the Ramayana, and it's a story of a prince who is exiled because his stepmother wants her son to be king. But the half brother responds by in fact denouncing his own mother and going in search of that brother to bring him back. So it's an allegory for how for an alternative paradigm of power. See, I'm sure that even when we became an accumulation society on that subcontinent, we must have had constant battles for power, and so it's actually a tale for how selflessness and renunciation is the path to a good society. But what happens in the story is that while the prince and his wife and his brother, younger brother, are in the forest, which is where they've been exiled to live in the forest, there is a king of Lanka who kidnaps the wife, and so Rama has to go and free his wife. He has to win back his wife from Ravan, and that's the context in which the battle is happening. And it is the victory of Ram over Ravan that is celebrated as Diwali. Many of you may have perhaps participated in an Indian community celebration of Diwali. But again, actually what is celebrated at Diwali is not the details of this story, but that it is the victory of light over darkness. And here light means knowledge, wisdom, compassion, versus darkness, which is greed, aggression, and in his case, covetousness. You know, he ran away with Rama's wife. And he's a great king, Raman. So he comes on this very grand chariot. And Ram, because he's living in exile, is barefoot, and he just has a bow and an arrow.
Thank you very much.
Right. And maybe we can, maybe if you give us at the Interfaith Center the reference
Yes, I will.
where to find it,
Yes,
we can
yes.
share that.
Absolutely.
We can email everyone later with some more of these
Yes.
resources. Sunita?
I have a question. We talked about so much all morning about resistance, and Henry, you said in the beginning that each one of these panelists don't represent their entire faith tradition, of course, and that there may be people in each, and there are people in each one of these faith traditions that actually have a different path, which is violent extremism in the name of these very religions. And so I have a question that I would like everyone to answer if there's time, which is if you could speak about the work you're doing in resistance within your own faith traditions. And then as I'm part of Sadhana, and Rajni is actually on our advisory board, sometimes we get the answer that when violence is perpetrated in the name of Hinduism, that's not really Hinduism. And I just want to ask that we not get that answer, but actually, because those people are perpetrating it in the name of the Hinduism that they embrace. So I'd love to hear from all of you on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sunita. And I think that's really an important question, because we have to kind of hold the mirror up to our own traditions as well. It's not like we come from some pure or innocent place and we're going to go from our own purity to challenge, you know, the Donald Trumps of the world or whatever. We all come from like a tainted place, and we have to embrace that and challenge it, and then from that perspective. Anyway, so thank you for the question, Sunita. Is anyone more?
Go this way? Okay. So I have personally, I'll answer for myself. I have two ways in which I respond to this. One is that to invoke basic humanism. See, because I find that if you, and I'm not saying this is the definitive or this is the right way, I'm just sharing my level of competence on this. When we engage with the people who are justifying the violence in any way, and I try, I know this is from experience, I've learned that if I try to engage them in chapter and verse of how they are theologically wrong, often that doesn't work in that moment, because they are so much in the grip of whatever anger and hatred is holding them. You know, so I try to then say, well, would you want that to be done to yourself? And there I find, and this is something that is very difficult to really, you know, live with on a day-to-day basis, that when you bring that up, inevitably I find that real or imagined, they have a sense of victimhood. So the justifiers of violence are bizarrely seeing themselves firstly as the hurt party, and they see their participation in and justification of the violence as therefore being a reaction and a response. The other thing that I'm constantly, now this is something that I try to do within my progressive friend circles, is that actually please let us not be confused that religion is the primary, offender here. The worst violence of the 20th century was committed in the name of non-religious ideologies. Okay, I'm currently reading an essay written by Albert Camus in 1946, where the war is over and there is such a vicious campaign going on in France by the communists, justifying murder as a weapon in the cause of revolution. And he is defending his position because he is being accused of being utopian. And he makes a point that currently I'm very much influenced by this line of reasoning, so I'm clinging to this one. He says, if I said that murder could be abolished, that would be a utopian. I accept that. I am not saying that. He's saying what I'm saying is that for murder to be justified on any grounds, including the one that is alive at that time, when there's a large swath of people who in the name of progressive justice, social justice, a better society are justifying murder of their ideological enemies. So to me, the problem is not religion. It is that when people become deeply attached to one particular version of justice or righteousness, because please remember that your religious fundamentalist at the end of the day perceives themselves to be more righteous than you and me. So the central issue is this to me, that when and that's why Gandhi is central. When the moment you are willing to compromise on the means, because you think that end goal that you have grasped is so supremely important, I think the battle is over.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for me also, I don't know. There are many thoughts on this one, so I kind of how to summarize what I think. But one point that I feel like because within my own tradition, like a Jodo Shinshu, very small tradition, they have all different interpretation. I don't agree this one, there are other people. So it's just another selfish thought. The view is always coming up. So it is actually natural for me. I mean, this is kind of weird, but is it natural to have different views? Some people could be, treated, religion could be violent. Yeah, so many part of the violent scriptures. So why not to say, that's fine. But then also the religion could be the other way, peaceful too. So in a way, it's just, for me, it's healthy to have all those different views. And if you have only one view and everybody's the same color and same thing, I don't like it. I try to be other way, probably. So, but anyhow, for me, the variety of things is the most important. The harmony is something that, if all different types of religions are here, then that's good. And if we have certain people not there, then that's going to be a problem. So for me, it's just it's just a part of things. But one thing that I feel like a source of violence comes from all those, sometimes political and sometimes all depends on economical things. I just feel like I don't know the answer either. But one thing that I forgot to do when I'm doing the presentation. Third thing that I'm focusing on, what I'm doing now, is the symbol called swastika in India. But then this has been used as a cross, right? As you know, the Hitler used a cross. His strong grief is there too. So this is his justice. Then does this justice is okay to do that way? So those are challenging for me. And then at the same time, kind of interesting, swastika has been one of the oldest symbols for 2,500 some years. But yet, if there's an interface center of New York, the central part of the symbol should be swastika, not any other, because it is. it is the most common symbol ever used for the religious, society. But religious people are not strong enough to say anything about the political things and so forth. So I feel like it's a little bit. So this is another challenge that I face. So I don't know the answer, but yet at the same time, there would be better to have the different viewpoints so that we could get something out of it. And then for me, that's the part of the peace. And then how can we make it peacefully, the discuss all these matters and wars and violence and all, including all those things. So I didn't say anything the right answer, but that's nothing is. But that for me, the question that I have is the source of whatever the answer might be. But yeah, anyway, thank you.
Well, I think, Suni, that's really an essential question because obviously there's been really an unthinkable amount of violence done in human history in the name of religion, by religion, within religion. I think we have to own up to that, and apologetics is not going to intellectually be the answer. In the Jewish tradition, similarly, it's all about interpretation and the way you interpret Torah or rabbinic law and how you apply it. I'm a rabbi. Meir Kahana was a rabbi. We have, he's no longer living, but we have pretty different perspectives on violence and nonviolence. I think there's a lot to be discussed about when religion is used as a political project, as it often is. So it's really, it's either a justification or it's hijacked for a political project. And that's not to say that the people who are doing it don't believe that it is an act of their religious faith. It's just an interpretation that ignores some of the basic principles that we've all shared about the sanctity of human life and building a just society. So I think maybe another panel or another whole conference is on religion and violence. Or religion and nationalism, or religion and, what does interfaith really mean when we're addressing questions like this that really are the difficult ones? Because it would, it's easy to do the kumbaya moment, but it's also as important to address the difficult issues within our communities and between our communities.
I think if I have to think about it rationally, I think in my interfaith work, I'm thinking about, as an Iraqi and how we just, alhamdulillah, just had to eradicate ISIS from most of Iraq and seeing things in Charlottesville and seeing work just around the country. Basically, as I stated earlier, our scriptures are roadmaps to justice, and that's finding a balance. And the Poor People's Campaign is really about the equal distribution of God's resources that He's bestowed upon us. So anytime there's an imbalance in these resources, that's when an injustice is felt, and that's when violence tends to happen. You have something that I need. Not necessarily that I want, but I need right now. And that is really the catalyst for a lot of violence, unless it's the ego, of course. And what I've seen is a loss of identity and a loss of self-worth and poverty and oppression, loss of jobs, loss of education, loss of health care, loss of water. That happened in Iraq. And it happened in Charlottesville with the white nationalism. When people are feeling that they are out of control, when people feel that they have no job to look forward to, no sense of dignity. They are losing their status. They are losing their clout. Their government is letting them down. If they were preyed upon to vote by people and they are being made fools out of, and they are vulnerable to being preyed upon either online or by gangs, offered stipends and given dignity and given a name and given a gang to gravitate to and sometimes given a weapon, people will get radicalized. Whether it is Buddhists in Myanmar who feel that the Rohingya are going to outnumber them, whether it is white nationalists here that really think that I'm going to replace them, or my Jewish friends are going to replace them. Like, why would I ever want to replace him? You know, or even in Iraqis who feel that they have nowhere to turn, or a kid in Ferguson. So it is really just loss of basic resources. I think that's what really makes people gravitate to extremism. And I think that's why this Poor People's Campaign is so important, is because the equal distribution of our resources is really what we have to remember that our scriptures are telling us to do. And that is what justice is all about. And that's what I've noticed.
Thank you.